2025-26 through to 2028-29 and fiscal policy paper, fiscal year 2025-26. Madam Speaker, I give thanks for the many blessings that have been bestowed on me, starting with my entire family, both here and abroad. But specifically, my daughter, Nyla, who is in the gallery right now, watching her mother. I give thanks to our Prime Minister, who has given me this historic opportunity. I also give thanks for my constituents in St. Andrew Eastern, who have entrusted me with the awesome responsibility to represent their interests. I give thanks as well for my counselor in the Mona Division, and I want to say thank you to the Financial Secretary and the staff at the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service for their diligence. I know they spent many hours pulling these documents together. For my ever-present CPOs who would go to the ends of the earth for me, I say thank you for your unwavering commitment. And finally, I also want to say sincerest thanks for my colleagues in Parliament, the many well-wishers and congratulations that I've received from Jamaicans from all walks of life on being selected by the Prime Minister to be Jamaica's Minister of Finance and the Public Service. Madam Speaker, I know I happen to be a female. Let me say sincerely, I truly appreciate all the prayers, the smiles, and the handshakes. Madam Speaker, this budget is the 10th budget being laid in Parliament by this Andrew Holness-led administration. Having won the general election on Thursday, February 25, 2016, at that time, the budget that was tabled and approved for fiscal year 2016-2017 was approximately $580 billion. Today, I am tabling a budget for fiscal year 25-26 that is $1.3 trillion. Madam Speaker, this growth in our budget over the 10 years demonstrates the underlying strength of the policies of this Andrew Holness-led government, starting with the implementation of the shift away from direct towards indirect taxation. The first manifestation of that policy was the increase in the PAYE threshold from $792,800 to $1,272,000 in 2016. And then again in April 2017, the threshold moved to $1.5 million in the famous phase it in that the then Minister of Finance and the Public Service, our very own Manayard, Minister Audley Shaw, so astutely shepherded through his tenure. Madam Speaker, that pivotal policy decision from direct to indirect continued last year, 2024-25, last fiscal year, when this Andrew Holness-led administration further increased the threshold to $1,788,000. Madam Speaker, Jamaica's national budget continues firmly in the trillion-dollar range, having crossed that threshold for the first time in fiscal year 2022-23 with a revised budget of about $1 trillion. Total expenditure and payments for the upcoming fiscal year are projected at $1.3 trillion. This continued strength of our budget has been so despite a backdrop in fiscal year 24-25 of dry weather or drought, severe impact of Category 5 Hurricane Beryl, Tropical Storm Raphael, and rainfall. Madam Speaker, rainfall in all 14 parishes during the month of November that ranged between a minimum of 125% all the way to 300% of the 30-year mean rainfall for the month of November, according to data from Minister Samuda and the Met Office. I am sure many of us remember feeling saturated with water. Madam Speaker, in considering the numerous shocks that our Jamaican economy has endured over the past 10 years, including a global pandemic and the extreme weather events, my word for the Jamaican economy and the Jamaican people continue to be resilient. Yes. But, Madam Speaker, the Jamaican economy did not become resilient overnight or just by itself on its own. The Jamaican economy has become resilient as a result of the people and the sound policies of this Andrew Holness-led government. These sound policies, Madam Speaker, are the building blocks of this resilient foundation that this government continues to lay as we pivot to higher and more inclusive GDP growth and the nation we envision. As said in the throne speech this morning, a nation of peace, opportunity, equity, and prosperity. That, Madam Speaker, is our next chapter. And so I look forward, Madam Speaker, to presenting the details of the fiscal year 2025-26 budget on Tuesday, March 11, 2025. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the tabling of the estimates of expenditure take place within the context of an acknowledgement by the Minister that the country is in a recession. We have had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, which meets that definition. But, Madam Speaker, beyond the interruption of Hurricane Beryl, the country was already on a trajectory of going into negative growth. The quarter before, immediately preceding Beryl, the country grew by 0.2 of 1%. In the quarter prior to that, it was 0.8 of 1%. Since our recovery from COVID, which was strong, we have been on a decelerating path of growth. So we are within the context of a recession. We are within the context of close to 50% of Jamaicans identifying themselves as being food insecure, 55%, sorry, who cannot eat enough. The calculation of what the nutritional supplement per day, 55% of Jamaicans say they cannot afford to eat properly. We are within the context, happily, low unemployment, but 700,000 Jamaicans who are outside the workforce, who have opted out. and where there is a significant gap between the needs of employers and the willingness of those who want to work. So, Madam Speaker, with the presentation of these estimates, the country is at a critical trajectory. The estimates, while tabled, and the details will come in the presentation, must address the issues of the anemic growth that the country is currently experiencing. They also must address our inability to spend our capital budget. For the fiscal year ending, $19 billion unspent. Last fiscal year, it was $11 billion. There's a direct correlation between expanding our capital budget and economic growth. For the procurement, yes, but you table it on Tuesday. You will start today, and we'll respond next week. Yeah. It is substantive legislation, Minister, and all we're asking for is the time to study it carefully. I see things in there, for example, I'm varying a bit, but I see things in there that give ministers the authority to change limits. That's significant. We need to understand what those limits are, the amounts. We want to ensure, yes, Delroy, all I'm saying is, you table something on Tuesday, give us an opportunity. I'm willing to come back next week and deal with it. So I'm saying, Madam Speaker, the budget must account for, in spite of our macroeconomic indicators, the hardships faced by the Jamaican people. So we are going to participate happily in the debate once it is open, and we will outline what we will be doing differently as an administration to lift Jamaica out of the challenges that it had. We look forward to the debate, Madam Speaker.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, I ask that we conclude the debate on the motion and that the motion be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister, next we will look at the procurement, public procurement. In response, member, the minister will open and then would move, I suspect, for suspending until we next meet to allow the opposition some time to come back with their prepared response. So, Minister, could you turn your mic on, please?
Madam Speaker, as this honorable House may recall, the Public Procurement Act, which was passed in 2015, was brought into effect by appointed day notice, along with the Public Procurement Amendment Act 2018 on April 1, 2019. Also promulgated were the Public Procurement Regulations, the Public Procurement Review and Reconsideration Regulations, and the Public Procurement Registration and Classification of Suppliers Regulations. Madam Speaker, the bringing into effect of these pieces of legislation marked a significant milestone in the public procurement landscape in Jamaica, as these laws represent a consolidated tool which anchors the reform of public procurement in this country. Essentially, an outdated and fragmented legislative framework was replaced with this updated, comprehensive law that contains provisions reflective of current policy thinking and good practice. Madam Speaker, just to repeat, the bringing into effect of these pieces of legislation marked a significant milestone in the public procurement landscape in Jamaica, as these laws represent a consolidated tool which anchors the reform of public procurement in this country. Essentially, an outdated and fragmented legislative framework was replaced with this updated, comprehensive law that contains provisions reflective of current policy thinking and good practice. The law established a new institutional framework with respective powers and scope of authority to bolster the attainment of the fairness objective and serve as a source of authority and served as a source of corruption deterrent. It also promotes economic development through transparent and efficient procedures that enabled increased participation and the upholding of value for money in public expenditure. However, Madam Speaker, there is need for further amendment to Procurement Act. This arose from our consideration of stakeholder feedback and our own observations of the procurement practice since operationalizing the Act and regulations in 2019. These amendments are necessary to correct conceptual or fundamental deficiencies, to address ambiguities by the legislation, to establish a new competition threshold, increase contract approval limits, and to ensure greater alignment between the Act and the regulations and the strategic objectives of the government. It is within this context, Madam Speaker, that I'm pleased to table in this Honorable House today, well, I tabled it last week, the Public Procurement Amendment Bill 2025. Madam Speaker, I will now proceed to do a presentation of the specific provisions of the bill. This bill is entitled Public Procurement Amendment Bill 2025. Madam Speaker, the preamble of the bill sets out the statutory context within which we're seeking to promulgate the bill. We then come to the enacting provision, Madam Speaker, and move on to paragraph 1, which sets out the name of the bill. Where's the paragraph? Clause 1, which sets out the name of the bill. Clause 2, Madam Speaker, has reconciled definitions for key terms used in the bill according to the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, Model Law on Public Procurement, and usual procurement practice. These terms are bid, bidding document, call-off contract, competition threshold, level of competition, open international competition, open national competition, restricted competition, solicitation, and solicitation document. Consequently, we have deleted the definitions for bid, bidding documents, international competitive bidding, invitation to bid, national competitive bidding, open bidding, procurement method threshold, sector committee, and standard bidding document. Clause 3, Madam Speaker, speaks to the amendment of Section 4.3 of the Act, which essentially removes procuring entities unnecessary administrative requirement of obtaining the prior approval of the Chief Public Procurement Policy Officer to negotiate and execute the procurement for goods, services, or works that are already exempt from the procurement methods and processes, services, or works falling within the first schedule. Clause 4 sets out that Section 71E of the Principal Act is amended to reflect the new nomenclature for bidding document. The term bidding should, as far as possible, be confined to procurement methods such as restricted bidding and open bidding. As there are other methods, the documents that are used are collectively described as solicitation documents. The Office of Public Procurement Policy is therefore responsible for developing solicitation documents, standard forms of contracts, pre-qualification documents, and any other public procurement-related documents for use by procuring entities. Clause 5 provides that Section 11(1) of the Principal Act is amended to reflect that the Public Procurement Commission, the PPC, as one of its functions, approves and endorses the award of contracts of a value above the Tier 1 limit. We've also deleted Clause G, which requires the PPC to establish, maintain, and register the sector committee's activities and to examine and consider their recommendations. With this deletion, Section 8 and I have been renumbered paragraphs to paragraphs G and H. Madam Speaker, we wish to effectively abolish sector committees in keeping with the Cabinet Infrastructure Committee's recommendation. Recall that sector committees were established by the PPC to assist it in the revision of contract award recommendations and have over time evolved into specialist committees. The Commission, that is the PPC, has now grown in respect of its technical competence to review the related subjects, and in an effort to reduce regulatory duplication, it is prudent for us to repeal Section 13 and 14 of the Act, which enables the PPC to establish sector committees to assist in the examination of tender reports for certain contracts. Sections 6 and 7 treat with this repeal of sector committees. Clause 8 speaks to deleting particular words. In Section 15, subsection 1 and subsection 3 of the Principal Act, and substituting them with the proper terms of art relevant to procurement practice. In particular, we wish to use the phrase submit bids instead of present bids in Section 15, subsection 1, and in subsection 3, we wish to use the term open international competition instead of international competitive bidding under Section 23, and competition threshold instead of procurement method threshold. Open international competition is a new concept that refers to unrestricted solicitation that commences with the publication of a notice of procurement opportunities in international and local media. Similarly, competition threshold is a new concept which establishes a toolbox approach of effecting procurement, one which ensures that multiple methods of procurement are available in all circumstances. That is, regardless of the method of procurement, for efficiency, a procuring entity may derogate from the highest level of competition and restrict participation to particular suppliers that are selected in a non-discriminatory manner. Clause 8 provides for the deletion of the heading, Part 3, Methods of Public Procurement, and insertion of new sections 22A and 22B in the Principal Act. Clause 9, thank you. The retitled Part 3, Methods of Public Procurement and Levels of Competition, sets out open bidding, restricted bidding, single source procurement, requests for proposal without negotiation, requests for proposals with consecutive negotiations, and requests for quotations as a range of procurement methods that can be deployed by procuring entities. Entities may also use the framework agreement procedure in accordance with Section 25F of the Principal Act. Madam Speaker, there are circumstances in which open bidding is unsuitable, requiring the deployment of alternative methods of procurement. These methods are to be used according to stipulated preconditions and distinct practical steps that differ from open bidding. The current law inappropriately conflates these methods, ultimately resulting in unworkable provisions that cannot reasonably be followed by procuring practitioners nor suppliers. In this regard, Clause 10 treats with amending Section 23(1), 2, and 3, and requires a clear record of the reasons for procuring entities' derogation from methods other than open competition. This record must be kept and form part of the procurement records of the procuring entity. Clause 11 deals with the amendment of Section 24 of the Principal Act. Throughout this section, all references to restricted bidding are replaced with restricted competition. Restricted competition refers to solicitation that is limited to the participation of a selected supplier or selective suppliers who are selected in a non-discriminatory manner. Clause 12 proposes amendments to Section 25 by inserting the requirement that single-source procurement is to be used by a procuring entity that is desirous of procuring goods, services, and works from another procuring entity. Madam Speaker, Section 25F, which treats with framework agreement, is amended by renumbering and inserting subsections 2 to 4 as stated in Clause 13. While the current legislation now provides for the use of open and closed framework agreements, it is silent on the mechanism for approval of framework agreements and call-offs made thereunder. This results in uncertainty over whether it is the framework agreement itself or individual contracts that are to be approved by Tier 2 or Tier 3 approving authorities. In this regard, Section 25F is amended to enable the procuring entity to make a reasonable projection of the aggregate estimated value of anticipated call-off contracts to be raised under the contemplated framework agreement. Thereafter, where the estimated value of these call-off contracts exceeds the Tier 1 limit, approval must be sought from the Tier 2 or Tier 3 approving authorities, as the case may be, prior to admitting any supplier to a framework. It would therefore be disallowed for a procuring entity to exceed the limits of the framework agreement. Practically speaking, Madam Speaker, The projection of the aggregate estimated value of anticipated call-offs should therefore be done at the planning and approval stages and must contemplate the entire value of these contracts over the life of the framework agreement. Participation in procurement proceedings as set out in Section 31 of the Principal Act is amended by deleting and substituting with subsections 31(1) and 2, which A, prohibit a procuring entity from limiting the participation of persons, firms, or entities in procurement proceedings that are discriminatory unless authorized by this Procurement Act, its regulations, or any other law. And B, allows for the application of prescribed special and differential treatment measures. Clause 15, 16 outline amendments to Section 34 and 41 of the Principal Act by replacing all references to presenting or presented bids with submitting or submitted bids. This coheres with procurement terms of art. Madam Speaker, I wish to advise this Honorable House that the amendment of Section 43 is intended to properly situate the application of the standstill provision. The standstill is a period of time during which an aggrieved bidder will be given an opportunity to make an application for review of the final decision of a procuring entity. It is meant to further the objective of fairness that is enshrined within the law. However, its current application in law to all contracts, regardless of the value, poses a challenge to procurement efficiency. While a bidder has a constitutional right to fair, equitable, and humane treatment by any public authority in the exercise of any functions, it is not clear that the obligation of fair and equitable treatment requires a standstill. All procedures and rules related to the treatment of bidders are already properly balanced to achieve those objectives. Additionally, the legislation now allows procuring entities the opportunity to proceed without standstill, suggesting that bidders do not have to benefit from standstill in all circumstances. The standstill is therefore to be regarded as a fail-safe, and to this end, only needs to be applied proportionately and in a manner that makes the legislation pragmatic and workable. To apply standstill invariably to contracts, regardless of value, results in undue and unnecessary administrative burden and delay. In this regard, Madam Speaker, Section 43 and 44 are amended to require the application of the standstill only to contracts above the low dollar value threshold and to make modifications to the point at which standstill would apply. In the case of the Tier 1 limit, standstill applies upon the procuring entity's determination of the successful bidder, and in the case of Tier 2 limit or Tier 3 limit, standstill will now apply where the procuring entity has determined a successful bidder and the Commission has approved or endorsed the award of contract. Further, Madam Speaker, Section 44 is amended to expressly provide that if a bidder's request for reconsideration or review results in a change of the successful bidder, then procuring entity must issue a new standstill period. The recommendation for award to the successful bidder must again be submitted for the approval in accordance with the Act. This amendment, Madam Speaker, is outlined in Clause 18. With regards to the supplementary provisions relating to the review board proceedings, Clause 19 sets out that Section 53 of the Act is amended to primarily reflect that Procurement Review Board must give notice to any person it determines entitled to participate in review proceedings along with the applicant and the PPC. Clause 20 sets out that the Section 61I is amended to ensure consistency of the terms of art solicitation documents and the standard forms of contracts, and that the Minister of Finance has powers under the Act to make regulations treating with these procurement-related documents. Madam Speaker, the first schedule of the Principal Act has been repealed and replaced with a current and updated listing of certain exempt goods, works, and services from the procurement methods and processes. Part 3 and 5 do not apply to the following goods, works, and service. Non-governmental organization under the conditions specified in Part B of this schedule, land or any immovable property or rights in relation thereto, works of art, cultural performances, products or services associated with creative expression, goods, works, and services relating to the staging of productions in support of or associated with creative expression and cultural events, including but not limited to artist coordination, direction, and management, the management of artistic works or events, the management of intellectual property rights, venue rental, infrastructure and technical effects, design and technical director of cultural performances, the engagement of artists and performers, medical services, legal services, medallions and insignias for use pursuant to the National Honors and Awards Act, goods, works, and services of a sensitive nature for use in or acquisition for the purposes of national defense or national security, travel services and hotel accommodation or facilities, contracts for broadcasting time, program material intended for broadcasting by broadcasters, goods, works, and services under multilateral or bilateral agreements to which Jamaica is a party, or an agreement between Jamaica and an international organization providing for an alternate system of procurement than that which is provided under this Act, educational instruction and training programs, goods, works, or services relating to or connected with the operations of Jamaican diplomatic missions or consulates, co-sponsorship arrangements, trade and travel roadshows, and cooperative advertising, the procurement of banknotes and coins for issue by the Bank of Jamaica, the implementation by the Bank of Jamaica of monetary policy and foreign exchange policy through financial contracts, financial advisory services procured from the International Finance Corporation in respect of road development projects in Jamaica, technical cooperation and assistance for the provision of goods, works, and services pursuant to any agreement between the Government of Jamaica through the Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority and the Government of the Republic of Singapore and through the Singapore Cooperation Enterprise related to or connected with the implementation of the Jamaica Logistics Hub Initiative. Group life insurance or group health insurance. Goods, works, and services required during a situation of emergency or extreme urgency notice in relation to the acquisition of which is published in accordance with Clause 3. Fiscal agency or depository services. services related to the sale, redemption, and distribution of public debt, employment in the public service pursuant to a contract of service.
Aren't you going to have time to speak, to ask her?
I know, okay, that should be included, thank you. Yes, National Debt. Yeah. Okay. Employment in the public service pursuant to a contract of service or a contract for services. Goods, works, or services provided by a foreign government or any foreign organization declared by the minister to be a government or organization providing technical assistance. Madam Speaker, the first schedule also included definitions for specific terms used in the bill, such as broadcasting, International Finance Corporation, Jamaica Logistics Hub Initiative, and travel services. The first schedule is amended to provide a distinction between situations of emergency or extreme emergency, which necessitate the award of a procurement contract referred to as an emergency contract. The procuring entity is required to give a detailed notice to the public of all emergency contracts awarded by that entity. The amendment to the emergency provisions also recognize that emergency procurement procedures will apply upon a declaration of a state of disaster under any law or a period of public emergency. Such declaration will allow for the formation of procurement contracts to ensure the preservation of life and public property. Part B of the first schedule is amended to reconcile the conditions for exemption of goods, works, and services donated to the government of Jamaica by a non-governmental organization under Part A. The second schedule of the Principal Act is amended to reflect a revision in the Constitution of the Public Procurement Commission and its chairman's tenure of office. In closing, Madam Speaker, I would just like to reiterate the importance the government attaches to amend the Public Procurement Act. It is necessary to the correct conceptual and fundamental deficiency in the Act, to clarify the law with respect to methods of public procurement, approvals, and value limits established under the Act, to repeal provisions pertaining to sector committees, to introduce the concept of levels of competition in public procurement, and to provide for additional works, goods, and services to be exempt from the generally applicable public procurement processes under the Act. The promulgation of this public procurement amendment bill will significantly advance this government's reform and transform the public procurement landscape in Jamaica. I therefore ask this Honorable House to pass this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I now ask that this debate be suspended.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that this debate be suspended. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, Madam Speaker, I It is not contemplated for us to do any further business today, so I therefore ask that the House adjourns to a date to be fixed. But just before, I just wanted to indicate and to remind members the dates for Standing Finance Committee meetings, and it's March 6, Thursday, March 6, and Friday, March 7. Members of the House, Standing Finance, will meet on those dates. So at this time, Madam Speaker, I ask for the adjournment for a date to be fixed.
The question is that the House do now adjourn, and the reminder is to have in our diary for March 6th, that's Thursday, and March 7th, Friday morning at 10 o'clock, we will have Standing Finance Committee meeting, which requires the entire House. Members, those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This honorable House now stands adjourned.